Hey folks, we're ready for our next talk, which is from Kristin Demoranville, and she's going to speak to us, as you can see, Sip Securely, Uncorking the Art of Cyber-Viticulture. So welcome.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'll give you 3 seconds to settle. So I know some of you are still moving around. My name is Kristin Demoranville. I am the CEO and founder of Anzen Sage. It's a boutique consulting firm focusing on the food industry. And that means all aspects from agriculture to production to supply chain, finished goods. I'm actually here to talk to you about a topic that I'm sure you never see at a security conference ever in your life. We're going to be talking about vineyards and the wine industry as a whole, and how it intersects with cybersecurity. So let me start by standing here and saying that this is probably one of my favorite quotes, and I use it a lot when I'm in conversations with clients or with other professionals. Is the quote from Jacques Cousteau: "People only protect what they love." How many times have you sat in a professional environment and you could tell people just don't care? They just don't care because it's about data, and the data is this magical thing that floats around. But when you start putting it on tangible things like critical infrastructure, which food is, it becomes this new emotionally driven situation. So I want to talk a little bit about why I love wine. I know this is a weird thing also to talk about, but it will have relevance and I will bring it back. I love wine because it's not just the drink that you have to complement a meal. It's not just a drink that you have to calm down after a long day. It's actually celebrating the environment in which the wine was created, from the soil to the climate, to the people who put their heart into making it, to the glass bottles, the minerals that went into making that, to the weather that created the grapes. That kind of story to me is amazing when you're having a glass of wine, and each will be different. So each bottle you get will never be the same unless you buy the same vintage, for anybody who's going to be smart about that. It's really pretty amazing. And a lot of the wine that we have in our days and what we drink is actually a mix of multiple grapes from multiple different regions into one bottle. It's those pure ones straight from one vineyard that you know really had the heart and soul of the grower. I really do adore wine. And because of that, I want to protect it. And not just because it's my job, but because it's something I deeply care about and it's emotional. So within all of that, I want you to ponder an analogy. Just like a bottle of wine is in cybersecurity also a product of various factors, stories that are interwoven. It's not just about wine. Shouldn't we also view cybersecurity as an honor and a privilege to protect? I don't know if anybody's actually sat there and thought about it for a minute, what we actually are doing, especially within critical infrastructure. We're actually saving lives. It's not just about data and availability. It's about people's lives. All right, I have a question. This is audience participation. Who's in charge of cybersecurity at a vineyard? Just yell it out. That was pretty good. Just in general, who's involved? That's it. It's actually the winemaker. And that's usually small to medium vineyards. Obviously, there's large, huge, complex distribution vineyards that have their own proper teams. But not everyone can fund that. If you've spent any time at the Virginia wineries, the winemaker is legitimately in charge of cybersecurity. It's crazy. So I will tell you that some of it is also outsourced. It just depends on how much the vineyard can spend. But generally speaking, mom and pop type farm, you're going to have people on site dealing with it. So what kind of factors is the wine industry facing? And how does IoT specifically and cybersecurity come alongside this? So obviously we have certain things like climate change, economic instability, labor shortages, increasing demands on sustainability and involving consumer behavior. What's interesting about all this is a lot of people don't realize how much climate change really does affect in a different way, not just in the soil and all of the weather changing patterns, but we're actually seeing it because of the wildfires, as an example. I don't know if anybody's had the privilege, or maybe I shouldn't say the privilege, but having a wine that's been around smoke from the fires, it actually completely changes how the grape is and how the wine tastes when you drink it. It's very smoky, like you just kind of inhaled a barbecue while you're drinking. So they're actually very concerned about that. It's actually one of the major concerns. They call it smoke taint. It's actually one of the biggest problems inside the industry right now. And climate change is a huge factor in that, obviously. So what they're doing is they're actually starting to attack it with different sensors and different techniques in order to avoid that. Economic uncertainties, obviously we know that the economies are going up and down, and inventory may not be there. They might be able to sell it. It could have to be sold at higher cost, distribution costs, all those things are major factors for them. Labor shortage. I'm not going to get into this one too much because it gets on a political spectrum that a lot of people get uncomfortable with. However, we don't have enough people to work at vineyards any longer. It's manual labor. Generally speaking, Americans don't like doing that. So they have to rely on volunteers. And obviously volunteers are free and that's wonderful, but they're not beholden to the organization. Sustainability, obviously that's a hot topic and a buzzword and going on right now, especially even our own industry. They're trying to definitely make sure that they have the ability to keep up with the trends and stay sustainable and help the environment come back. Consumer behavior changes. I'm sure everybody sees it, Instagram, all the other various different social media. There's so many different types of wine coming up and down, skinny wine and various other different blends and all these things in a can, in a bottle, in a sack, whatever. How do you keep up with that if you're just a small production house and you're a family working on a farm? So a lot of this does come down to IoT. It becomes quite cost effective because you can deal with the shortages of labor, climate control, and different other things. Let's talk about a little of that. So there's a few examples that are up here. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I mean, if you have questions, come talk to me after. I will say that I find it really fascinating that we're relying on this technology in vineyards because you don't think about that. You think about, yeah, maybe a farm or something like that, but you don't actually think about a vineyard. There's devices that actually will tell you when the grapes are ready for harvest. And they look very like Star Trek-y. There are devices that are measuring the moisture in the soil, in the vine itself. There are devices that are doing weather. They're doing fire and CO2 monitoring. There is little robots that will pick. And then of course there's drones for surveillance and for irrigation and a bunch of other things, even fire suppression. But the overarching issue is, how are they securing that? How? Is it on-prem? Is it remote? What's the deal? Most of the time, these devices are connected via Wi-Fi. There's a lot of them that are now going to 4G, which is a little more secure, debatable, of course, but we like that more. There's a lot of them that are done just by remote, so you have to go pull the data from them as well, which isn't very secure and won't be helpful in the long run. However, again, a lot of it is cybersecurity is just overlooked anyways, just one more thing that they've got to put on their plate that they don't want to deal with. And I can imagine that would be really frustrating if you actually had something happen and a cyber incident happen on your vineyard. What would you even do? Who would they even call? They have no idea because that's not something they're there to farm. They're there to create wine. They're not there to deal with technology. But the problem becomes as technology becomes to the forefront and the answer to everything, digital transformation has reached this level. And unfortunately, the cybersecurity community hasn't caught up yet to the fact that we got to start getting in there more. I wouldn't necessarily put wine as a critical infrastructure. However, wine is culturally very important. Wine is deeply emotional. What do you do when you've had an amazing thing happen? You get champagne out and you toast, right? If we didn't have that, you can toast water. I'm not saying there's not a reason you can't do that. However, it's still much more wonderful to have bubbles and have that experience. And I think that people forget that, especially in our community, that we forget what we're protecting. We get too stuck on the risk management framework or the assessment or the shiny. We don't actually think about the people that we're helping behind it. So this is that call to action. start thinking about that when you are in different environments. I know a lot of us already do that by default. We stand in a room, we count the cameras, or we know how many cars just came in out of a parking lot, or we know if there's a gate or all those things. Or we test some of the social engineering ourselves by trying to break into buildings we probably shouldn't be in. There's stories I'll tell you later. So, but start thinking about it when you pick up your glass or you have something to eat. Where did that come from? Did we have cybersecurity behind it? Are you worried about people messing with your food through a cyber incident? There's too many examples now. Dole packaged lettuce just got hacked. The JBS meat got hacked a couple of years ago. There's so many examples now because they're easy targets, financially driven, motivated, easy targets, easy picking. I had a reporter reach out to me the other day and ask me, what's the most horrible thing that would happen if a cyber attack hit, and what would it do to hurt the food? And I went, I'm not answering that question. Like, that's crazy. Why would I give an attacker the actual, like, here's the best way to do it, 101. And he laughed and he said, yeah, of course, because, you know, the other person I asked also said something similar. And I said, good, because yikes. But it is very simple to break into this because there is zero protection happening right now, other than regulatory things. So like PCI is in play in these vineyards when you purchase, obviously, because they're using things like Square and things of such. However, if that's the only thing that you think is cybersecurity, that's a real big problem, because that IoT, those devices are super critical. I raced through these presentations so quickly generally. So I want to open this up and we can talk about a little more if you want. And don't be shy, because I want to really dig into this, and we can talk a little bit beyond wine as well, and just agriculture and how it's so important, again, to start thinking about this in such a different space. I think we get too rigid by our frameworks and our everyday security prowess that we kind of forget that we're actually doing things that are really super important. Like, I like to eat. I think everybody else does too. And how we keep that safe. So I'm going to open for questions. And if there's questions online, can somebody get that to me as well? Thank you. Oh, there's one down here.
Like how the winemaking process works, and I guess how that has changed over time to integrate more technology. You said there were like devices that tell you when the grapes are ready, and like that's super cool. But is there anything, because like, look, I'm stupid. I don't know, to me it's alcohol, like I drink it. Like how it's made, you know? So it's like, are there any devices or things in place that tell you like it's like not good, or are there any like additives that go into alcohol? And I guess my thinking is like, if somebody like was like, I really hate this winery, I'm gonna mess them up. They could like hack into their stuff and like mess with the additives in there, and like would the winemaker be done the winery? You know, it's actually makes sense.
No, yeah, it totally does. It's a great question, actually. So I'm not going to get into like the total process of making wine, because I feel like that would take us a bit. But long story short, the grapes get picked, they get thrown into fermentation, and then eventually wine comes out. That's probably the best way to say it, which is really awful for me to say it like that, but here it is. A lot of things can affect wine in terms of consumer behavior and purchasing, and if it becomes toxic. So there are temperature, air quality, ventilation, light, and humidity. You can mess with any of those, you mess with the wine, that's it, it's done. It's not going, it's going in the trash. That's what we call skunking. I probably just dated myself, but if someone really wanted to affect something. So let's talk about growers. There's a difference between growers and just regular distributors. So let's take Dom Perignon, for example, which is really lovely champagne, the 2010, not the 2012. So that particular wine is actually a blend of multiple grapes from multiple different vineyards in the region of Champagne, France. If that one grower got hit and they couldn't bring that particular grape in, that vintage year is toast. It would either change, they have to make adjustments, they probably have to alert their clientele. It could probably wouldn't damage the brand too much, but it'd still be icky, right? It wouldn't be very comfortable. This is why third-party attacks are so deadly. We see this all the time, where a hacker, bad actor will come in through a third party and push through into what the actual company they want. So if somebody wanted to hurt Dom Perignon, they're going to go through their growers, right? more than likely their growers are smaller, don't have as much infrastructure to be able to maintain a cybersecurity team or any of it for that matter. And then they'll destroy the wine. In terms of actually poisoning the wine, I'm sure there is a way to do it that would impact the wine and poison it, and the winemaker may not know right away. But you can remember wine sits for a while, right? It sits in, barrels, or it sits in stainless steel barrels or oak or whatever. The wine gets checked through that process. So tracing the contamination would be an absolute nightmare for food safety and food defense, if you think about it, because what part of that process from the big tanks down into the barrels, when did something happened? And if if you just turn the humidity up just a little bit, or if you turn the temperature up just a little bit, or if you put light into the barrel for a certain period of time, that would in theory destroy the wine. So, or if you put like an onion somewhere nearby, that's going to wreck the wine because it's really sensitive to that as well. So there's a lot of ways that you can totally affect the product and make it poisonous, but you would probably be caught on some level because as they're bottling it, they're still tasting it, they're still trying it, they still know. But that doesn't mean we wouldn't necessarily hurt someone who's tasting, or someone who is growing. It depends, right? But the real damage would be done if someone did something to the harvest, to the crop. I think in that space is probably the worst. And because we've got too much tech monitoring it now, that becomes the concern. It would just take a couple of drone crashes and you could probably light the whole vineyard on fire, those kind of things. Or you could not have a fire sensor go off and have your vineyard go up. Or you could have toxic waste be somewhere that's coming in that shouldn't be there, runoff, erosion. The biggest problem with grapes growing is they don't like a lot of moisture. They don't like to be wet.
No, I was thinking about, there's a lot of people in the cybersecurity industry. There's a lot of people in the food industry. What's the normal path of that person skills to get into food resilience in cyber?
Do you like to eat? Then you're in. No, I'm serious. It's really that simple. I actually started my career. I probably should have been a little more clear about my background. I started in food manufacturing when I really cut my teeth in security. And I didn't know anything about food other than what my mom taught me, right? Or my grandma. I didn't know that, the way you have to avoid peanut allergies and things like that. I didn't understand any of that. So as soon as you start to understand how the production process works of any product you're working on within food, you really can start to help break those security controls in a better way, because it isn't just necessarily about the tech. And I should make this very clear. It's about people and process, because people are always going to circumvent your controls. They don't care. They just want to get their job done and go home. Nobody wakes up in the morning and thinks, I want to work at a factory. Like that's not going to happen. So they just want to get home, give me my paycheck, and I want to go home. As long as you understand people to a point where, and I'm assuming you do because you're in the industry, and how absolutely ridiculous they can be sometimes, both in the best way and the worst way, you start to understand, especially with food, because it's so deeply emotional and so important to sustain life, that it becomes a different marching order for you internally. So anybody can get into it. It's a great question.
You spoke about wildfires a little bit. I'm from here, and so we had smoke and everything here, not as bad as other places, obviously, but how does that affect wines and from the cybersecurity perspective?
Sure. There should be the sensors that detect smoke, same as a fire alarm kind of sensors. Those are actually IoT driven. They usually hang in trees, kind of like a trail cam, if you will. And those particular sensors could be hacked, so you wouldn't know that there was smoke in your area. There's not a lot you can do. It's there. But if you can get ahead of it, they could have probably changed. They could have covered. They could have removed. They could have done a lot of things. Here, it wasn't affected as bad. I think upstate New York with their vineyards, I think they got probably a little bit of smoke taint, unfortunately, because of what's happening. Obviously, we know California. I mean, it is what it is. And then unfortunately, that is something they're going to have to deal with more and more. There isn't a way to actually mitigate it, but there's a way to know it's happening. And then they can make a determination if they're going to pull the grapes. You can make different types of wine per when you pull the grapes if they're out. But the real problem obviously would be the vines themselves, because they're very sensitive to smell and everything else that I've described. So cybersecurity, the only play is that they have early warning. And if they lose the ability for early warning, they won't be able to react to it. So that's a good question too.
So there's a couple of online questions for you too.
Great.
So the first one is, what's one of your go-to types of wine? I feel like this must be asked. Inquiring minds want to know. What do you like to drink? It wasn't.
Red, white, or which one do you want? Varieties? The older I get, the more I really do love champagne, specifically champagne. I'm not a huge cava fan, or Prosecco fan for that matter. I really do like champagne. However, in terms of red wine, I really like a bold red wine, kind of like minerally. I would say like licking a rock, as I always say, that really like full tannin kind of, it's an experience in itself, and I'll drink it by itself. I don't need food for that. A lot of those varieties are Bordeaux, any type. There's Meritage here in the States, Pinotage from South Africa. I've been really enjoying blush, but I'm really particular about it. Or rosé, sorry. But yeah, those are what I would say. In terms of brands, I don't really look at the brands, I look at the grape. So I think that's the big difference between people who love wine and people who just want to drink it. And I'm not picking on anybody, obviously. But I do love those varieties. That's a great question.
So actually the same person had another question.
Okay.
This is a little longer. As I watch winemakers locally struggle with different things, I don't see much embracing of technology like this. How quickly are you seeing the growth of acceptance of IoT tech elsewhere? I'm not sure if they mean like other food industries.
Oh, other food industries, they've already adopted. Digital transformation's huge. As much as they can automate, as much as they can install sensors and everything else to run as fast as possible, the more they can produce, the more money they make. So of course, they're pushing hard. Small farms, small vineyards are not going to adopt as fast, but I do think if we take a different look at it, they do have management softwares for their point of sale. So that is kind of adoption, right there. They have, their little iPads and devices they can, swipe. Those kind of things are considered IoT in my mind. They probably do use sensors that you probably don't realize, more than likely on their fermentation tanks. That way they can monitor it overnight and things of such in that regard. But in terms of like a full IoT automated vineyard, nope, that would probably be the big boys out in California, boys and gals. And I wouldn't see it too much anywhere else. Virginia, for example, is not the biggest wine producer in the country. In fact, I don't think we hit the top 5. I think it's, California and Oregon and New York that are the big ones.
Awesome. Thank you.
No problem.
I think, did I get another one? Nope, that was it for questions. So
Great. So obviously my contact information's up there. Oh, Jessica.
How is the culture in cybersecurity different in the industry than some of like manufacturing?
That's an amazing question. It should be better, but it is not. I would say a lot of times cybersecurity is just going along with the flow. It is changing because the food safety and the food defense people now realize they need to partner with cybersecurity because contaminations need to be traced. It's law. In order to do that, sometimes you're going to need cybersecurity data that comes from one of our particular products they have in the environment. Also, too, it could be caused by a cyber incident that hasn't officially been released yet. Most of them are financially driven, hasn't been to go right after food, but it's only a matter of time now. It's not an if, it's a when, unfortunately. What also is happening too is the food professionals, and I can only speak from my experience, what I'm doing with the food teams is creating more of a safety culture than a secure culture, if you will, combining different processes that both the food professionals use and cybersecurity uses, because we're kind of talking about the same thing, just on different levels. One's about food and we're talking about protecting and securing. Same kind of concept. So within that, there is a blend that's happening. It's actually kind of beautiful to watch because, again, like I said, food is so emotional and so transformative in that regard that it's so much different than just protecting an enterprise database, which is still important, don't get me wrong, but nobody cares about that. Like, we don't have like actual feelings for it. We see these data centers that are popping up all over everywhere and just go, ugh. But with food, you're like, yeah. And so it's a totally different experience. And I've been learning so much about it from the food professionals, how passionate they are, talking about how some of their family members have passed through E. coli poisoning and salmonella, and having these deep rooted conversations that are about quality of life and about living rather than just, again, a computer and data. So it is different, Jessica, but it's hasn't quite got there yet. We're getting there. So I spent a lot of time in different consulting firms in cybersecurity, and I started to see a trend of we have too much generalized and not enough specialized. We don't go to the doctor if we know we need to get our appendix out and they're like, okay, cool, I'll cut you open right here. Like, no, you need to go to a surgeon to get that done, right? Like, you're not just going to have some Yahoo do it for you. I think we need to start really focusing down and niching down, especially in the critical infrastructure. We already do it in oil and gas, and automotive. Why aren't we doing that with food? So I really started to become quite passionate and taking a stand on that. It's been a ride, let me tell you. But no, I actually got my first cut into food was actually when I started feeding animals at the National Zoo, and I cut food at the commissary. That was probably, and then obviously I went through the restaurant world when I was in my 20s, and then working in the food manufacturing space for a long time. And then I switched into electronics and semiconductor, and